the working in the round basics video, we will have started with stocking stitch in the round, and you'll have noticed that there's no purling, because in order to get stocking stitch when you're working in the round, you just knit all stitches. So when you're working flat stocking stitch, it's a knit row and a purl row, and in the round, it's all knit rounds. And the reasons for that is that the bumps keep going to the back, because the right side of the work is always facing you. So this has implications for all types of stitches. So for example, garter stitch, which is normally all knit rows when I'm working in rows, it is a knit round followed by a purl round when I'm working in the round. That's very important to know, because sometimes in patterns you will see cast on, join in the round, knit and stocking stitch for 8 rounds. Of course, if you do that and you knit the stocking stitch as if you were knitting your piece flat, so in rows, by doing a knit row and then a purl row, as a knit row and then a knit round, you're actually going to end up with garter stitch. So what I'm doing here is I'm showing you that when I purl my rows, my garter stitch bumps come to the front, creating that garter stitch look, not stocking stitch. So it's just worth bearing that in mind as you're learning how to knit in the round. This is the same with rib, garter stitch, etc. It's also really useful for later on when you become a more experienced knitter and you are converting patterns from working in the flat to working them in the round, or vice versa. Not to worry about it too much now, but it is something to be aware of. Another reason why this is very important is that gauge changes even if I'm doing stocking stitch in the round and stocking stitch flat. So for example, where I am knitting a round, knitting a row and purling a row, my purl stitches might be a slightly different shape to my knit stitches. But in stocking stitch in the round, I'm knitting all the stitches all the time. So I can't always assume that my gauge in the round and my gauge in the flat are going to be the same, even if I'm using the same size needles and the same stitch pattern. So it's worth bearing that in mind. It's not something to worry about too much now. We're going to talk further about that when we're knitting the mittens, because we're going to be working those in the round, and we'll be talking more about gauge then. It is, however, really useful to know, because it's not something that we always talk about when we start knitting in the round. So combining the two of those, it's really useful to know that your stitch patterns are different when knit round and in the flat, and also that your gauge varies. And part of the reason that it's useful to know both of those things is that you can go from working in the round to working flat and then back if you wish. So for example, in this case, I'm actually just going to turn my work and I'm going to start purling my row. Doing this is very common when you're knitting socks, sweaters, etc. So for example, when I cast on a sock, I might knit the leg in the round, but then I might need to flatten it out and do my heel flat. Same with sweaters. I'm knitting in the round from the body maybe, and then I'm going to come to the top and I want to separate the back from the front so that I can do my armhole shaping. And a lot of the time it is literally just turning your work. Now if I am going to go back to working in the round, then you're going to have to worry about those gaps. But again, that's something that we will talk about later on. But you can see that it's just a matter of turning it, adjusting the stitch pattern to make sure that you're doing it correct for either working in the round or the flat, and then just working on knitting. So let's look at two examples. In this sock, I've knit the leg in the round, and then I come down here and I'm going to knit my heel flap flat. And then I'm going to come back and I'm going to start joining back in the round, and I'll do a magical gusset pick up to make sure I have no spaces. Then if you look at a sweater, that the body is knit in the round, and then I split for the sleeves, and my front and my back are knit flat. So those two navy pieces are knit back and front. So you knit those back and forth in rows and then in the round. And if you look very closely at the sweater, you can probably see that my knit in the round tension is ever so slightly tighter than my knit in the flat. And that is because my purl stitches are a little bit bigger. And that is really one of the great reasons it's useful to know what your tension is and how it varies between working flat and in the round.